Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Yashinsky.
Thank you, everybody, and what a treat to have you all out tonight, and thank you to all the stories that have been told so far. So I worked at Baycrest for a number of years as their storyteller in residence, and since the theme tonight is romance, I think I heard the most romantic thing I've ever heard in rehab one day, and a woman had just said goodbye to her husband in palliative care. And she was 90, and I think he was 92 when he died. And the nurse in palliative had said to her husband, being a cheerful nurse, "How long have you been married?" And he said, "Not long enough." And another thing, and I'll say this to honor Chris for telling that moving story about Jane, who I also knew. There was a guy came on to palliative, his name was Milton. And when I met Milton, he was surrounded by all the women of his life. His sisters were there, his wife was there, his daughters were in the room. He was, I don't know, in his late 80s, and I walked in, and Milton just said, "I won the lottery," the women lottery. And I got to know him, and he was a very funny man. He had a lot of jokes, and but he was dying. And so one day I was walking down the hall, and I looked into a room, and there was his wife, who I had gotten to know, and his daughter. And Milton had gone into the state that in palliative care they call actively dying, which sounds a little contradictory, but that's what was going on. So he was a few hours from death, and there he was, and his wife was looking, well, you can imagine, grieving, and his daughter was there. And I stepped in just to pay my respects, and I said, "Look, it really was an honor to meet Milton. He was a funny man." And I was about to leave, and then I turned to his wife and I said, "Did he have a favorite joke?" I'm not really sure why I asked it at that moment, because it was, rather awkward moment. But she looked up, and even in the depth of grief, she said, "Yeah, he did." And so I said, "Would you tell it to me?" And she did, and I'll tell you the joke, and then I'll tell you why I was telling you this story. And the joke was, she said, the Pope needed heart surgery. The Pope was very sick, and he came out on the balcony of the Vatican, and he looked out at the whole crowd at St. Peter's Square, and he said, "My people." So you have to understand, Milton's Jewish, but anyway, this was his favorite joke. "My people," he says, "my cardiologist has told me I'm going to die unless I get a new heart." Everybody in St. Peter's Square crying, the Pope is going to die. He says, "So I would like to ask one of you, my people, my faithful flock, if one of you would give up your heart so that I may live." I'm the Pope. And thousands of voices came up from the square below, "Take my heart, take my heart," in bad Italian accents. And the Pope on the balcony, "It is what I expected, my people, and I thank you. I thank you from the bottom of what will be one of your hearts." I thank you, my people, and I accept. But so that I may choose whose heart to accept, let us look for a sign from God. And just at that moment, flying over St. Peter's Square was a white dove, and a feather fell from the wing of the dove and began to float gently down over the thousands of people below. The Pope said, "That is the sign from God that I was looking for. Whoever the feather lands on, that person will give up your heart so that I, the Pope, may live. Thousands of people yell, take my heart! So, and Milton's favorite joke. His wife tells it to me over Milton, who was in his deathbed. That became part of her eulogy. And why I wanted to mention, after hearing Chris's very moving story, was that we become our loved ones' story keepers, including the jokes that they love to tell. So I got introduced at some point, I don't know, as a traditional storyteller, and I like the old-time stories. So there was a woman who became a stepmother of a little boy. And unlike many of those fairy tales you might hear, she was a very devoted stepmother. She loved the little boy. His mother had died, and he would have nothing to do with her. No matter what she did, he turned away from her. She would cook his favorite food, and he would throw it in the fire. She would make him beautiful sweater, and he would throw it in the mud. Nothing she did could make her stepson love her. And her heart was broken. So she went to see the old wise woman of the village. And she said to the old wise woman of the village, I don't know what to do. Do you have a magic potion that can make my stepson learn to love me? And the wise woman said, yes, I do. I can make you a magic potion, no problem. I can make it. It will guarantee it'll make your stepson love you. And she said, I will do anything. Tell me what do you need to make the potion? She said, I need one ingredient, but it's very hard to get. She said, but if you can bring it to me, I can make the potion. And the woman said, I'll do anything. And she said, all right. Bring me the whisker of a lion, and I can make the potion. Now, a lion had been killed not long ago by some of the villagers. And she said, well, I'll just go. There's a dead lion. She said, no. Not a dead lion. It has to be the whisker from a living lion. And now the woman's heart was broken even further, and she thought, how can I possibly do it? She said, well, unless I have that ingredient, I can't make the potion. So she went home, and she thought about it all night long, and she thought about it. And in the morning, she took a piece of meat that they'd had, and she went very deep into the forest to an area where there was a lion living in a cave. And she put the piece of meat down, and she ran and hid behind a tree. And she watched as the lion caught the scent of the meat and came out of its cave and came up to the meat, and she was hiding behind the tree. The lion ate the meat. The lion roared. Her blood ran cold, but she didn't run. Lion went back into the cave. The next day, she came back out into the forest, and the same thing, left the piece of meat. Again, the lion came and took it. And this is what she did day after day. Until one day she put the meat down and she ran to hide behind a tree, but she didn't run quite so far. And she waited and she watched. The lion ate the meat and went back. The next day she was a little closer. The next day a little closer. Until one day she put the meat down and she stood beside the tree in full view of the lion. And when the lion looked up, it roared, but it didn't attack, and it ate the meat. And the next day, a step closer and a step closer. Until one day, many, many weeks later, she took the meat with her. And she sat down and she held it in her hand. The lion came towards her. And she was that far away from the lion, it looked at her. It took the meat, it went back to the cave. And the next day the same, and the next day the same. And the day after that, when she had the meat in her hand and the lion ate, she took a knife. The lion didn't even notice, and she snipped a whisker from the living lion. And when the lion went back to the cave, she ran straight to the wise old woman. And And she said, I have brought you the secret ingredient, the magic ingredient. Please now make me the potion. And the old woman looked and said, yes, this is indeed the whisker of a living lion. And then she threw it in the fire. And the woman said, why did you do that? This is the ingredient you need to make the magic potion. And the old woman said, you don't need a magic potion. Anybody who has the love and the courage and the patience to win the trust of a lion can surely take the time to win the love of a little boy. And she did. And the little boy came to love her as his own mother.